I believe it's okay to, push those traumatic events away. I definitely believe that, right? Before that you even got into doing all that healing and stuff, I believe it's perfectly fine and okay. And actually, part of the process of healing is to suppress and push away those feelings or traumatic events, because without doing that, then when you don't push it away, or you don't try to subside and push it, those traumatic events or traumatic stress down into that rabbit hole, then I believe when it is and it comes time and ready for you to start healing from these traumatic events, you won't be ready, because you have rushed into trying to heal it too quickly, right? It's a process to everything, right? It's okay that you have pushed that trauma down, you know what I'm saying? And it's okay. That's all part of the process, pushing that trauma down. But now it's time to bring that trauma from out the ground and to let it sprout and to grow and sprout to what it is, right? What is good with y'all boys? YouTube, it's Boogie, back at it again with another banger for y'all boys today. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, we got another video for y'all boys today. Appreciate each and every one of y'all for tuning in and listening to what I have to say. This video is gonna be a little bit different today though, and the reason being is because a lot of this topic that I'm gonna talk about, I don't really see a lot of people talking about it. This topic is not talked about enough amongst the community of, just people, the population in general. So I feel like this is one of the key concepts to ever moving forward in life, right? And by moving forward, I just mean by improving your everyday situation, improving your current lifestyle to make it a little bit better every single day, right? The topic we're going to talk about today is healing is the very first step into self-improvement, right? So forget all those other steps that a lot of people talk about. They're like, oh, if you cut out procrastination, or if you start journaling every day, then you'll start. If you start journaling every day, and if you start having a checklist for everything, then that's going to be the first step to having a better you and more self-improvement. But I say no, not so fast. And the reason why I say that is because before we can get into any of that other stuff, we have this thing called trauma, right? So what is trauma? And before we get into this video, I do have my notes, you know what I'm saying? So I will be, going a little bit off what I have written down, and then, it's gonna be off the dome also. But look, man, I just wanted this video to be a little bit more organized. Anyway, so look, man, trauma. Now, what is trauma? What is trauma? So many people go through trauma, but not a lot of people understand what the true definition of trauma actually means, right? A lot of people might say trauma is the breakdown of emotional or psychological of traumatic events, right? So something that you had went through emotionally at a very young age. Maybe you were emotionally abused when you were younger, or maybe that you saw someone get hit, you know what I'm saying, and that was very traumatic, for you to experience, right? Now, I would say you guys are absolutely right that that the definition of trauma is the breakdown of emotional and psychological post-traumatic events or traumatic events, right? But I would say to y'all that it goes a lot deeper than just that. See, we could always view life on a surface level, right? But why do that? Because we'll never get the depths in understanding that we're looking for by just staying on the surface. We need to dive a lot deeper into understanding what this trauma is and what it is doing to our psychological brain, and how we can go about changing that trauma or healing from that trauma to improve in life, right? So you've got 3 different traumas, and I'm finna break that down to y'all, right? So the first trauma that you have is called chronic trauma, right? So chronic trauma is basically a repeated and prolonged trauma. So what that might mean for you is domestic violence, right? That happens. That's not just a one-time thing. People who go through domestic violence and domestic abuse is usually on a very consistent basis. It might not be daily, but it will be on a consistent basis. So you have stuff like that, or maybe you weren't domestically abused, emotional and physical abuse, right? I mean So then it goes to emotional and verbal abuse, right? So those are chronic. So that happens on a consistent or a constant and consistent basis over a long period of time, right? So that's the first step to the first level of trauma that you have, which is chronic trauma. The second one is acute. The second one is acute trauma, which is just a singular event. So like I was saying earlier, maybe you witnessed somebody get hit by a car, or maybe you grew up in a very dangerous environment. You grew up in the trenches, you grew up in the hood, and so maybe you were walking to school one day and you saw your first dead body, right? That is an acute trauma, right? Which means it's in a single event. That means it only happened one time. Now, nonetheless, it's still trauma, and whether it happens chronic or only happens once. So the third type of trauma, or the third level of trauma, is complex trauma, which is the occurrence of multiple traumatic events, invasive, right? And maybe interpersonal to nature, right? So what examples can I give out what examples can I give out that might better help you guys understand what complex trauma is? So you have things like child abuse, right? You have child abuse, emotional neglect, sexual abuse, sexual assault. Those things can happen to people on a multiple occasions, right? Someone can get sexually assaulted multiple times. Someone can be sexually abused multiple times, and so that means that they have an occurrence of multiple traumatic events that have gone through within their lifetime, right? So now that we understand those are the three different types of traumas that people go through, maybe you've gone through complex trauma, maybe you've only gone through one single traumatic event, but nonetheless it's all the same, it's all trauma, right? So now that we understand that, we can dig a little bit deeper into breaking down what that trauma and what this does to us, right? So we know that our trauma affects us psychologically, right? We know that our trauma is a psychological thing that happens to some type. Whatever we experience or whatever we go through in life, that type of trauma has a certain effect to our brain, right? So we know that the psychological effect that it has on our brain is mental or emotional state of a person, right? So certain trauma that you might go through, it might affect your mental or it might affect your emotional state of being, right? So with that being said, trauma is an ubiquitous event, right? That means it occurs a lot, right? It occurs a lot more common than people think, right? So every 6 out of 10 men have experienced trauma at least one time in their life, and for every 5 out of 10 women, they've experienced at least one type of trauma within their lifetime, whatever the case that might be. So if it's so frequent and it's so common amongst us as a population, why do so many of us not understand how to heal from that certain trauma, or how to cope with that certain trauma? See, a lot of people, whenever we think about trauma, it kind of brings a bad memory into our brain, something that we don't want to think about, so we try to push it away, or we might hear a certain sound. For example, like let's say a bomb went off right outside my house, right? And that was the first time that ever happened to me. I witnessed that traumatic event, right? Now, before that bomb went off, I heard a ticking, right? Let's say I heard a ticking and the car alarm started beeping, and then the bomb exploded, right? So now, after that event had happened, now every time it's in my subconscious mind, every time I hear a ticking or a beeping, then I get a sort of overwhelming paranoia over my body, and I just lock up and I don't know what to do, right? See, this happens to a lot of people. It might not be that was just an example. It might not be a bomb, but it could be, they could be somebody could, like, let's say for instance the kids in Ukraine. Those kids are traumatized. Their hometown, the place that they grew up in, was literally obliterated by bombs. The shells going off, those bomb shells going off all over while they're still in their house or at some type of bomb shelter, trying to take cover and protection away from that bomb. Now, as those kids grow up, they will have that traumatic event. A traumatic event replaying in their head. And now every time they go out or they see someone, they have to be on their P's and Q's, or if they hear a certain type of sound or noise, then they get real tense and they get real paranoid because of that one traumatic experience in their lifetime, right? So hold on, my bad. So I'm turning to my notes right now. So let me see. Right? So we understand that trauma is an ubiquitous experience. That means it happens a lot more frequently than people think. So what does that lead to, right? So we understand, now that we understand what trauma is and what type of impact trauma has on our hearts and our brain, more so on our psychological, right? Now that we understand what this trauma does to us on a lot deeper and physical and now that we understand what this trauma does to us on a lot deeper and emotional and mental level, what can we do about that, right? Remember, I said healing is the first step to self-improvement. So if you can't heal from your past trauma, whether that be a bomb went off outside your house, or you got sexually assaulted, emotionally abused, physically abused, domestically, whatever the case might be, it's still trauma, right? Now, you could push that trauma, farther down the rabbit hole all you want, but at the end of the day, that trauma is still part of you, right? That trauma is still you at the end of the day, if that makes sense. And I'm finna explain why that trauma is you at the end of the day. Or I'm finna explain to you why that trauma is still you at the end of the day. But before we go into what you can do to heal from that trauma, I forgot to graze over one more important key factor, which it might not be, okay, let's just say it might not be physical abuse, and let's say it might not be verbal abuse, let's say people that make fun of you, let's just say you grew up and let's just say your dad was real hard on you and he made sure he kind of beat you up about certain stuff. He said, okay, I don't want you talking too much, or I don't want you saying too much, right? So now as you grow older, you are now in that mentality of, hey, I probably shouldn't say too much because this might trigger somebody's way of thinking of me in a negative way, and so I'm very mindful. I am very mindful of what I am saying, right? And now that you're growing up like that, you've grown up with that type of trauma of, hey, your dad told you, hey, you better not be saying this, or you better not be saying too much, or whatever the case might be. Let's just say that, right? Let's just say your dad was really hard on you when you were growing up, and it made it very hard. It made it very hard as a kid to make mistakes, right? And so that you go throughout life and trying to tiptoe and make sure you don't make any mistakes, right? See, that's trauma also, because that's the complete opposite of how life works. Oh, don't make this mistake, right? Don't look on somebody else's paper. Only use your paper. Don't get any outside help. Only learn this material on your own. Don't get any cooperation or help from anybody else. See, then you grow up in the school system, then you grow up in an environment of, hey, dang, I gotta do everything by myself, and if I don't do everything by myself, then I'm screwed, right? See, that's another form of trauma that a lot of people go through, and that the school system promotes. The school system promotes that type of trauma of not being able to get help, trauma of, hey, you can only get this, you only got one time to get it right, you can't mess up, you can't fail, you can't do none of that, otherwise you're going to be doomed to life, which is not the case at all. But a lot of kids get traumatized at a young age, so now they have to kind of live their life in a perfectionist way. Same thing with parents. Parents probably look at too much, they probably expect too much from their kids to make them to almost to the point where they want their kids to be perfect, and it leaves no room for error, which is the most common thing that you find in humanity is error. We're not perfect humans, we're not perfect beings, right? So with that being said, okay, so now that we gotten all that trauma out the way, now that we understand the three types of different traumas and what that trauma has on our psychological, what impact that trauma has on our psychological, what can we do to go about healing from that past trauma, right? Now, I like to do this little thing called shadow work. Now, Ron, you might be sitting here thinking, man, what is shadow work? Well, that's real simple. Shadow work is going within and working on the darker side of yourself. Now, I like the reason why I put quotations over darker, because people like to disown that part of their self, you know, that darker side of themselves, when the truth of reality is what's light needs dark and what's dark needs light. It's a balance, right? So when you say your darker side, all your shadow work is just maybe the side of yourself that got neglected as a kid, that you have, you know, pushed down deep into the rabbit hole. You shouldn't have done that, and I'm not blaming you. I'm not blaming you because you did do that, because that's all you knew to do, you know. That's what was easy for you, and that's what people told you, is to kind of, you know what I'm saying, oh, go throughout, Johnny, you need to go through life, and you know you're gonna go through stuff in life, but you need to get back up. So you know, you just kind of suppress that stuff because that was the easiest thing to do, to keep you rolling, to keep that ball rolling, to keep you on your feet, right? Without really going within and understanding what this trauma has done to you. You kind of just let it subside, suppressed it, and just kept pushing it back down, right? And that's not what you should be doing. So shadow work, right? And I'm flipping to my notes right here. I'm sorry about that. So shadow work and what's in your inner shadow is, right? So what's in your inner shadow? Your inner shadow is your subconscious mind. Let me say that again. Your inner shadow, or your darker self, is just your subconscious mind, right? That's all that is. So when people say do shadow work, you're just doing inner work on your subconscious mind that a lot of people push down into the rabbit hole, right? So a lot of people will say the shadow is the dark and emotional aspect of the brain, right? The dark and emotional aspect of the brain, while your conscious mind or yourself is the center of your personality or your psychological state of being, which is your conscious awareness, right? So, you know, when you have these terms that people like to put on this stuff, right? It gives us a sense of understanding how our conscious and subconscious mind works. So now understanding how our conscious mind, which is us awake, and how our subconscious mind, which is us not awake, or our mind of, you know, how we go about our day and stuff like that. That's our subconscious mind. The things that we do on autopilot is our subconscious, right? So we have, now that we understand this, is animus, right? Or So now that we understand there's the subconscious mind, and then there's the actual conscious mind, right? 90% of our day is used in the subconscious mind, and only 10% of our waking day is actually 10% conscious, right? So a lot of this work, 90% of the time, you have to really dig deep and really work on this subconscious if you want your conscious reality to manifest into some positivity and affirmations, right? So you have this thing called animus, right? And all animus is a part of you that has the capacity for self-reflection, right? Which self-reflection is self-improvement. When you self-reflect, right, you see the things that you are doing, and you see the things that you aren't doing, and you have no bias in between that, right? It's just what you are and what you aren't doing, and what you can do to change that, right? What you can do to go about changing the things that you aren't doing, so it could, you know, kind of just really working on your weaknesses to turn them into strengths, correct? So, right? So the fourth thing that you have, right, we have the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, the animus, which is the power of self-reflection, and the fourth thing is your persona, right? So the persona is the mask you wear to show the world why you protect your inner self, right? So going back to what I said earlier, maybe your dad or your environment really shamed you for making mistakes, and so now that you've gone throughout, you know, your childhood of trying not to make any mistakes, you know, you don't leave any room for error, and so you feel kind of humiliated, or you feel kind of embarrassed when you do make mistakes, because you've grown up in your entire life trying your entire being not to make any mistakes, right? So your persona is the mask, right? The mask that you put on over yourself to show the world, hey man, this is who I truly am. So let's think about this, right? If I have a Michael Myers mask on, right, or if I got a Jason Voorhees mask on, right, I've got the Jason Voorhees mask on, right? Where I look like Jason Voorhees, right? But under that, who am I? I'm still Ron, right? I'm still RB. I'm still Ron Boogie, right? So that persona, that mask that you have up in front of your face, that is the persona that you're showing the world. That is what the world is seeing, right? Now, what is the saying that everybody likes to say? Just because you take shit and paint it gold doesn't make it have any value, right? Same thing with just because you put on a persona, that's not really you. That's just a persona that you have put on in front of the world to make it seem like you're tough or to make it seem acceptable to the world, but that's not really you. That's not who you truly are, right? So now that we understand that, right, persona and what it does, so we went through and explained that. So to go into a little bit more depth of persona, anything that threatens the way of your present self, your present being, right, to the world, right, which is bringing your shadow to the light or your darker side to the light, which is really just you, just your other side that was suppressed, that you suppressed over the years. It's still you at the end of the day, but it's that darker side that you suppressed over the years that people don't want to see, or that people try to shame you for bringing out, right? And so when people try to shame this, they try to make it seem like this darker side to you is a threat to your identity. So you need to put up this, they make it seem like you need to put up this mask. Otherwise, you know, if you don't have this mask on, this darker side is going to threaten your identity. And that's not true. That's not true at all. That's a common misconception that this world loves to promote, right? So what people don't understand is that this darker side needs to be actually explored and needs to be understood and needs to be explored, because at the end of the day, like I said, it's still you, right? And it doesn't need to be understood, it needs to be understood. So when I mean by understood, it on a psychological level, something that you understand, something that you truly within yourself understand, right? That this is having this pushing this darker you, this mask or this persona of you, pushing this down and deeper, pushing this out of sight, out of mind, is really hindering your ability to self-improve, right? So a lot of bad might come out of, you know, pushing down our darker self, quote unquote, right? A lot of stuff, a lot of bad things can happen out of pushing down our darker side, right? Including anxiety and depression, self-loathing, self-sabotage, self-absorption, and also an inflated ego, right? So you might be thinking, Ron, what do you mean by you might have an inflated ego, or you might have self-sabotage, or you might have anxiety or depression. Well, now when you think about it, right, the very thing that you were ashamed of for doing so much as a kid, you're now in the habit and you're now used to trying to suppress or trying to change those imperfections, that when you see those imperfections in somebody else, you project those imperfections out, and you get mad at them for having those imperfections, because that's what happened to you when you was a kid. So now you're projecting that persona of having perfections onto other people, onto your children, and that just also makes everything 10 times worse, because guess what? The exact same way you grew up, if you keep exploiting and putting out negativity like that to other people and to your children, guess what? They'll grow up in the same way you grew up, and then it will just be a hamster wheel in a continuous cycle of you know, trying to be a perfectionist and to never make an error in life, and that all this other gibberish and mumbo jumbo bullshit, right? So now we understand that pushing our darker self down can cause more anxiety, can cause more depression, can cause self-sabotage, and could cause an inflated ego, right? And all your ego is just your ego. See, look, you guys, so all your ego really is your own sense of self-esteem and self-importance. So when you're doing that, when that darker side was hindered so much when you were younger, right? You've now begun to inflate your own self-esteem and your own self-importance to kind of help balance out that what's the word I'm looking for? Balance out that sense of emptiness and void that you were left with when those people or those environments or whatever the case might be traumatize you into thinking you're not good enough, right? Or even maybe it might not have been your environment, even the things that you saw as a kid, like a bomb going off outside, or you walking over your first dead body, as a kid, or whatever the case might be, whatever that trauma might be, it's considered your darker half, that half of you that you don't want to have any part of, that darker half that you keep getting pushed down deeper and deeper and deeper, keep getting suppressed, right? So that's never good, because when you press it down, guess what? When you suppress stuff or you press it down, it doesn't go away, right? It just forms and shapes into what you have pressed down. So think about it like water, right? Water takes the shape of anything that you put it in, right? If you put water in a cup, then water becomes the cup, like Bruce Lee said. If you pour water into a vase, the water becomes a vase, right? Water it becomes whatever you pour it into, or whatever it is in. It becomes a fluent movement to whatever it is being applied to, right? So when you think about it like that, right? Our trauma is basically our darker half. Our trauma is our darker half, right? And if you really want to self-improve, if you really want to take that step forward in life, you have to attack that trauma from the root, right? Which is that shadow work, which is that inner subconscious mind, which is, a lot of people went through, childhood experiences. That's where a lot of trauma arises from. It's a lot of people's childhood experiences, and even the trauma that hasn't, arisen from childhood experiences. Maybe it's something you just went through a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, whatever the case might be. You had went through it, and your subconscious mind doesn't like that, and it's just naturally, just from the what's the word I'm looking for? It's shadow work. Shadow work is the inner works of your subconscious mind. It's really attacking and really getting to the roots of your inner trauma or your inner problems, right? So what is shadow work, and what can I do to start practicing shadow work? Well, that's simple, and I've gotten it written down right here, right? So your shadow, like I said, your shadow isn't a flaw or a mistake. It's a natural part of who we are, right? The goal is to have self-acceptance and self-compassion through your shadow work. That's the goal. That's the whole reason why we're trying to achieve this shadow work and trying to work on our darker half or our darker self, is because at the end of the day, we want to explore and express our own self-creativity in our darker half that we have through self-acceptance and self-compassion, right? So before discovery comes exploration, right? When you explore your darker half, you find the creativity, which is discovery of the things that you've been hindering so long. It's actually a positive. It's actually a pro. It's actually something that you can understand and work with, and have your own sense of creative dilemma with it, right? When we're understanding our darker half, when we're understanding when we're understanding our darker half, when we're understanding and doing our shadow work, right, we're looking to have more self-compassion, right? So what is self-compassion? Well, I'm finna read y'all the exact definition of self-compassion, right? Self-compassion is extending compassion to oneself in instances of perceived inadequacy, failure, or general suffering, right? So that goes back to what I was saying earlier. Your trauma, whatever that trauma might be, you have to go within. You have to understand what that trauma is, why were you so traumatized by this event, right? Once you understand the why, then you can start working on the what can you do about this? What can I do to heal from this process, right? So you're starting to give yourself a lot more self-compassion, right? And this is something that you want to work on in your subconscious mind, right? That's the omniscience part of your of shadow work, which is understanding and self-reflecting, right? You have to self-reflect. You can't keep running from your past, because ultimately your past creates your present, right? So no matter how much you run from your past will always keep chasing you and following you, because it's simply you, right? Now, when you accept your past and you understand your past, then you start to heal from that past, and then you start to see that yourself becomes more creative, and that your weaknesses start to translate into turn over and transmute into strengths, right? So you have the practice of self-compassion, right? You have to be very self-compassionate with yourself. You have to be very understanding with yourself, understanding that, hey, whatever trauma I had went through, right, or traumatic events, or either one traumatic event or traumatic events, right, that had happened, that I had to heal from these past experiences, right? So you know that self-compassion is strongly associated with our psychological well-being, right? So you have to be very self-compassionate. You have to be very understanding of your past experiences, and you have to be very patient. Very, and that's the key word I want to use, is very patient and understanding with yourself on healing from your past experiences. This needs to be something that you work on every single day, so that you can have a progressive healing from this situation, right? This ain't something that you could do overnight. Shadow work is something that you have to hit every single day. You have to be consistent with, just like any other area in your life, right? You have to go to work every single day if you want to make more bread. You have to go to the gym every single day if you want to get more muscles, more gains, more aesthetically pleasing physique, right? So the same thing applies with working on your subconscious mind. This is something that you will have to do every single day, but it's not impossible to heal from, right? Now, you can go about healing from this on your own by doing within shadow work, but if you have severe trauma that you can't get over, I recommend you going to a therapist, or doing both of these, right? Because this is something that you can heal from. This is something that everyone needs to heal from if they want to self-improve and take that really first step into self-improvement and changing the situation of their life and changing the status and the value, or all that other stuff that combines into one. All of that stuff can't happen unless you work on healing first, which is the first step to self-improvement, right? So second thing that you could do for shadow work is to keep an open mind, right? And keeping an open mind just means being open to new ideas, right? You're not just on your path. You're not just, oh, this is only what I know, and this is what I know, and this is what I'm gonna stick to. No, you gotta be open-minded. You gotta be willing to, guess what, grab information from that person and the other person and the other person and the other person, and then guess what, once you have grabbed information, opinions from everybody else, right? You take those information, opinions, you pull them all together, and guess what? You smash them and formulate your own opinion and your own sense of your own sense of opinion about the situation, right? So you have to be very open-minded. You have to be very accepting when it comes to healing, right? You have to heal from this trauma. You have to heal from these past experiences, right? Otherwise, you'll be fucked up in the head, wondering why, hey, bruh, I feel like every time I take one step forward, I take 3 steps backwards, because it's that past holding you down. It's that darker half that you haven't came to terms with, right? So it knows that it can keep beating you up. So also, when you're meditating, right? When you're locking in and focus on your breath, and you're focusing on yourself, right? That's being open-minded, right? So I'm gonna tell you guys what meditation is. Satipatthana, right? That's a form of meditation, which means, right? I'm gonna rearrange these words for y'all so y'all understand what this is. So all Satipatthana meditation is mindfulness meditation, which is one step to the eightfold path of enlightenment, right? So the goal in Satipatthana meditation is to pay attention to that trauma when you meditate, right? So don't push it off to the side. You got to pay attention and really understand what that trauma is doing to you and what effects that trauma has on your psychological mind, right? So sati means attention, right? So Satipatthana, sati means attention, right? Upa means inside, correct? Upa means inside, and thana means to keep, right? So sati, upa, patthana, or Satipatthana, right, means to keep your intention inside. That's all it means, to keep your intention inside. So when you're practicing mindful meditation, you're being open-minded and you're making sure that you're keeping your intention inside and understanding what you're doing within, right? See, when we do mindful meditation, it seems to change how we relate to our own feelings, which can change how we relate to the world, right? So when you focus on your own feelings and how you feel within, and you pay attention to that, it seems to change in our psychological aspect on how we correlate and we go about interactions with this world, right? So with that being said, the practices of mindfulness is bring awareness to what is already in our minds and what we are actually doing, right? So stress, tension, depression, anxiety, sadness, whenever we practice mindfulness meditation, these are the things that we have to pay attention to, our feelings and understanding our emotional connections that we have and our psychological subconscious connections that we have, right? So before you can even go into really healing and really working on that trauma, that's not the first step. There's another step that comes before that, before really working on and really healing your trauma, which is just observing your trauma, which is really coming to terms with that trauma, right? So when you're observing your reaction to your trauma or your problems, instead of engaging with them, what that does is it helps your body it helps your mind appreciation of your psychological mind of your feelings and your trauma of your own passive, which is your own passive products of your mind, right? So your trauma, your feelings, your emotions, that's your own passive products of your mind. And instead of really working on it before you get into working on those feelings or trauma, all you have to do is simply observe that trauma. See, a lot of people have trouble even just with observing trauma, right? Which means in their subconscious mind or when they meditate, they're just thinking about that trauma. A lot of people don't even want to think about that experience because it just brings them bad memories or brings them back into the past of how they felt in that current moment. But hey man, like I said, there's steps to healing, bro. So even before you get into really working on that shadow work, you have to observe your feelings, right? You have to observe those traumas or those emotional feelings from a more open-minded and understanding mindset, right? See, with trauma, as humans, our hearts and our mind, our psychological mind and our hearts are very deceitful, right? Your emotions will fluctuate and your understanding does not see the overall bigger picture, right? So that's why I say take your time, be patient with this stuff, right? You have to be extremely patient and extremely understanding when it comes to working on your trauma and your inner, and you have to be extremely patient with working on. You have to be extremely patient with your. You have to be extremely patient with when it comes to working and understanding your darker self or your darker half, right? We know that we know, everybody knows, or most people know that trauma is not as easy to heal from as people say it is, and I 100% agree it's not. By no means is trauma easy to heal from, but it is possible, right? It's possible to heal from trauma. It just takes time. You have to be patient with yourself. You have to reflect on your progress in your journey of shadow work, you have to reflect on your progress, and you have to reflect on your progress in life in general, right? You have to reflect on your past in general, along with reflecting on your progress through the journey of healing, of your healing process through doing your shadow work, right? You could also write that stuff down. Your traumas, your stuff that you're having problems with, you could write it down so you can see it on paper in front of you. So when you see it, it gives your brain just a little bit understanding, a little bit better understanding of what you're going through and how to go about fixing this situation, right? Or fixing these multiple situations or these multiple traumatic events, or healing from these multiple traumatic situations, to really become at peace and at one with yourself. The dark side, the darker side, or the light side, that's all one. It's all one. Yin and yang. It's a balance to life. Everything has a balance, right? So you have to heal from your darker side, and you have to focus on your darker side just as much as you focus on your lighter side, so that you can become one whole being, right? And you won't have anything holding you back, okay? See, with shadow work, you have cognitive distancing and you have postponement, right? Cognitive distance is just reminding yourself that the events themselves don't make you angry, but rather your judgment about them, rather your judgment about them causes that passion. So you have postponement. You have to wait until that trauma or those feelings have subsided. So if your trauma has just happened, don't try to jump straight back into trying to heal from it, because it just won't happen. Give yourself time to understand the process. See, there's steps to trauma, and I believe even before you even before you heal from that trauma, right? Before you even go into healing that trauma, I do believe that everybody that has gone through traumatic events should be okay with allowing those traumatic events to replay in their mind, right? To allow those traumatic events to hit hard, to hit home, because that traumatic event happened to you, but you know what I'm saying, that's the past, right? I'm not saying that a traumatic event won't happen to you ever again, but as we go through life, bro, you have to think about it like a story, bro. You know what I'm saying? When you reading a book, bro, when you read the books from start to finish, bro, you know what I'm saying? It's a continuous thing. You start on page 1 and you read all the way till you get to the end of the book, right? So even when you're going through chapters in life, or you going through certain things in life where you have witnessed a traumatic event and it's very stressful to you, I believe that it's okay to just before you even want to go into healing that traumatic event, or healing those traumatic events. I believe it's okay to push those traumatic events away. I definitely believe that, right? Before that you even got into doing all that healing and stuff, I believe it's perfectly fine and okay, and actually part of the process of healing is to suppress and push away those feelings or traumatic events, because without doing that, then when you don't push it away, or you don't try to subside and push it, those traumatic events or traumatic stress down into that rabbit hole, then I believe I do believe that when it is and it comes time and ready for you to start healing from these traumatic events, you won't be ready, because you have rushed into trying to heal it too quickly, right? It's a process to everything, right? It's okay that you had pushed that trauma down, you know what I'm saying? And it's okay, that's all part of the process, pushing that trauma down. But now it's time to bring that trauma from out the ground and to let it sprout and to grow into what it had already been, bro. See, it's not already been, but to grow and sprout to what it is, right? See, it's a process to everything. There's steps to everything. I believe that you have to go through one thing before you can get to the other, right? So you have to go through that traumatic event. You have to go through that suppression, that of not wanting to understand your darker self, or suppressing your darker self or your traumatic events, before you actually really step into observing those traumatic events, and then taking that one step further and actually working and doing your shadow work on those traumatic events that you had went through in your life, that sits in your subconscious mind, right? So, there's a lot to understand. There's a lot of information in this video that I want you guys to understand, but I do want you to understand this, right? It's a process, B, it takes time, and B, and C, you have to be very understanding of yourself, right? Right? You have to be very, very, very understanding with yourself if you want to heal from any type of traumatic stress or traumatic events that you have went through in life. Right? You have to be very patient with yourself. That's the key to all of this: is patience, open-mindedness, and self-compassion. Those are the three things that's going to help you get through that trauma in life, right? So that concludes the video for today, ladies and gents. Appreciate each and every single one of y'all for tuning in, listening to what I had to say. I will be having more bangers like this one on the channel coming up in the future, so y'all stay tuned for that. I love you guys. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.